Hello and a very warm welcome to Rajya Sabha Television. You're watching The Big Picture with me, Frank Rausan Pereira. Well, India is among 7 countries to back a UK-led campaign against end-to-end encryption of messages from social media giants, or rather by social media giants like Facebook and several others. This, they say, hinders law enforcement agencies to carry out their work and blocks them from access to these messages. The UK and India are joined by the US, Canada, Australia, New Zealand and Japan. It marks an expansion of the so-called Five Eyes group of nations, a global alliance on intelligence issues to include India and Japan. In this edition of The Big Picture, we will analyze the drive against encrypted social media messages. Joining me on the program today are Gurjit Singh, former ambassador, Elisabeth Braw, senior research fellow, American Enterprise Institute, UK, and Munish Sharma, consultant, IDSA. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of The Big Picture. Ambassador, I'd like to begin the program with you first. Let's try and understand the level of coordination really as far as these nations are concerned to fight against encrypted social media messages. You know, what is the Five Eyes? How did this whole concept come about? And why is it that they want to fight against encrypted messages?
Thank you. This is one of the very important issues today. What you have is several liberal democracies coming together to restrict what is considered privacy. So looks like a contradiction. But the background to this is the Five Eyes cooperation, which India has joined, which essentially was intelligence cooperation to deal with, non-traditional threats like terrorism, which are now known to use modern technology to work among themselves, communicate, to inculcate their ideology among others, and radicalize youth, particularly through the means of the internet. At the same time, we also have issues like disinformation and misinformation, what we call fake news, which is known to be interfering in the democratic processes of different countries. So there is a kind of a threat the democracies feel coming from the openness of their system, which includes the use of the internet by forces inimical to them, both state and non-state. This is the background to which more intelligence cooperation is required. Having said that, what you invariably come up against is the traditional challenge of where does security and public order end and where does privacy and individual freedom start. This adjustment is always necessary. Now, as the world has seen better technology, the elements of intervention into that technology have also succeeded. For instance, when letters were written, there were ways of, interceding letters. When the phone was created, then you found ways of intercepting phone calls. When mobiles came, people thought this cannot be intercepted. You found ways. So as technology grows, it tries to provide efficient communication, which is secure, so that your trade, your business, your national security, and everything remains protected. Now, today, I think the biggest challenge which we face, as I said, one is both state and non-state actors challenging your democratic processes through intervention using your open systems. And secondly, what some people feel is that the privacy afforded by end-to-end encryption is necessary for the trust in technology to be maintained. For instance, we have this huge digital India in India, and we have these, electronic payment systems. Now, these require a trust in technology. At what point are we willing to trade a trust of that we have with the intervention of state security? I think that is where the question really lies and what we need to address.
Absolutely. I think very well summed up there and very well put into perspective, really, as far as where this is coming from and why it is required. Elizabeth Braw, let me bring you into the picture now. So, how big an issue is this as far as law enforcement agencies are concerned? Is it difficult for law enforcement agencies to deal with these encrypted messages?
Is a huge challenge, especially since so much of the communication that we have with one another today is conducted online. And so it could be a fantastic resource for law enforcement agencies. But then, as the ambassador so succinctly described, there is a barrier between where national security ends and privacy begins, and where exactly is that barrier? And so far, technology companies have been very reluctant to let law enforcement access users' messages, because obviously they think that if law enforcement accesses those messages, people won't use the services anymore. That's not that's not an erroneous assumption. But on the other hand, if law enforcement agencies have this phenomenal resource, and if they're only looking for people who have violated the law, as is the case in our democracies here, it's a completely different matter in authoritarian countries. There, you really do need encrypted messages. But if they're only looking for people who have violated the law, I think governments, especially the Five Eyes countries and India and Japan in this case, have a really strong case to say there is no fundamental reason why we shouldn't be able to access the messages, and it's in everybody's interest to keep society safe, and that's what it boils down to. Most of us don't say anything dangerous whatsoever in our messages. It's just a tiny percentage or a tiny number of people who engage in preparation of crimes by using these messaging services. So why should law enforcement agencies not have the right to access those messages? But it's really important to point out that this debate should be had in democracies. It's completely different in authoritarian countries where these messaging services are the only way in which suppressed people can have any sort of contact with one another without being watched by the government.
Absolutely. All right. So, Munish, let's talk about this particular aspect from the company's point of view now. Something that Elisabeth raised as well. So, as far as these organizations are concerned, why don't they want to share this information? What is it that they lose if they share this information?
Frank, I think this is not exactly a question of sharing information. As far as like the entire historical antecedents say, whenever there is any big profile case in which particular manner lawfully, whenever the government has requested for information, like through a court order or something, companies have complied to an extent. For example, Apple did provide the backups of a particular case put on iCloud. So these kind of collaboration, I would say, or compliance does happen. But here the larger question is to put backdoors in the encryption system itself, and that is what is much more alarming, because I believe, and it's a well-known fact now, we as users of technology or smartphones, encryption is not something like which was earlier like restricted to very close section of society. So now, day in and day out, when we use our smartphones, when we store our photographs on it, when we store our bunch of whole personal information on smartphones, encryption is the only guarantor of the security of this information. And when you talk about having backdoors into encryption schemes or into encryption algorithms, I think that's way concerning in the sense that technology does not differentiate between intent. So either you are doing it from a good intent, like from a law enforcement perspective, or when an intelligence agency is investigating a case of terror or act of terror, and somebody who's got a malicious intent behind cracking, getting information about you or hacking into your smartphones or about your company's trade secrets. So I think when we speak about backdoors, this whole debate is something not new. It's almost 5 decades old. It's as old as when the entire discourse of encryption moved into the public domain, and the whole idea of standardization of encryption algorithms came up. So all throughout 1990s, if you remember, there was this discussion about clipper chips, which was more about embedding these small chips into phones, like more of about personal to personal communication devices. over last 5 or 6 years, I would say, and if we can summarize it or if we analyze it in a way, we'll see that there is a wholehearted effort to weaken, in a sense. Like, I mean, there are different connotations of weakening encryption algorithms. Either you can do it through building of backdoors, weakening of keys, or building laws accordingly. There are so many ways and means of doing it to weaken algorithms or weaken encryption. But as technologists, if we look at it, I think this is purely against the interest of the society. In a way, the entire idea of knowledge economy or the way we are looking at technology, internet, artificial intelligence, it all rests on encryption. So encryption as technology is the sole guarantor of all these things. So I think we should refrain from weakening the whole idea, weakening this whole structure of encryption, and rather than we should work towards strengthening it and then trying to figure out all those, feasible ways and means. I'll say feasible because when we speak about end-to-end encryption, and if you are asking WhatsApp or probably Apple in between to decrypt and give it to you, I think that's not going to happen because even they don't have the visibility on most of the content. But yes, when it's about metadata, when it's about with whom I have been communicating or with whom a particular perpetrator had been communicating or his backups on cloud, I think those compliances to an extent give you quite a lot of evidence. I think you don't need to actually get to know what exactly two human beings have been talking, rather than you have to figure out the whole picture, and that actually suffices a lot when you are looking for evidence.
Okay. Let me take the points that you're making forward, and because the ambassador too touched upon this in his opening remarks, he brought in privacy and and national security and all of these other aspects. So ambassador, there's a very fine line, isn't there? Because most of these countries, most of these democracies that we are talking about as well, are big on privacy and are big on as far as privacy laws are concerned. So these kind of aspects are there too. So where does the privacy line end, and where does the aspect of national security really begin?
To be honest, Frank, I don't know, because this line keeps shifting. And let's take the issues that have come up today. So let me say upfront that I am in favor of public order, public health, and security of my country and the free world at large, right? To that end, if law enforcement says certain things need to be done, I would like to trust them as much as I trust the technology I operate on. Now comes point two. Whether it's the United States or in many other democracies, the trust in law enforcement is decreasing, not increasing, which creates the contradiction on where does security end and who do you trust more, my technology or the people who are asking to peep into? That is the second question. The third question is, I think, and Munish brought this up. So I must say, I agree with Elisabeth in the macro sense. But in the micro sense, I agree with Munish. In Apple versus FBI, 2016, when they wanted to get Apple to open and de-encrypt a phone, what happened was that when the phone was finally decrypted, there was no worthwhile data on it. So the question boils down to, is law enforcement, when they don't know what they are looking for, in what they are looking, what is it that they are seeking, it leads to what are called phishing expeditions. Now, this is a gross violation of privacy, because then you fish in a large pond looking for many things. Now, this is where Munish says what are called backdoors. Now, when you say, will Apple or will WhatsApp give me information? Between end-to-end encryption, frankly, they themselves do not have access to the information. So you can have all the access to information on what are called unencrypted public platforms. So supposing IS is recruiting people through the internet on Facebook, that is visible. You know a crime is being committed and you can deal with it. Secondly, even if you do not have access to end-to-end encryption, Munish mentioned metadata. What it means is that who is speaking to who, what is their IP address, what are their email addresses, where are they located through GIS coordinates. I think these are all available to law enforcement, even today, without going into end-to-end encryption. And I think the biggest caution about end-to-end encryption is that terrorist organizations use it for communication, which we do not have access to. But what they put in the public domain, like I said, Facebook posts of recruiting people or where to come to join an organization or where to go for a demonstration, All that you already know. There's nothing encrypted about it. But if you try and open the back door, then you open a backdoor to the entire system, because as Munish said, it is not intent. You open technology and the trust in technology will diminish. And what will happen, that the people you are looking for will simply form their own encrypted codes and move on. After all, we have seen it happen. Ciphers are not a new thing. We have seen it happen. So what I believe is that there is insufficient proof available that end-to-end encryption is certainly hindering law enforcement. I think that argument has not been won. And
Right.
this argument is being weakened by both the United States and the UK actually talking more about child abuse than terrorism as their main reason for doing this. And I think on that, the issue is really suspect. At least India has not gone to child abuse as the reason for trying to end end-to-end.
Absolutely. All right. So, Elisabeth, Braw, let me take up this particular aspect then. So can messages be shared with law enforcement agencies from, on a case-to-case basis? Whenever there is a request that is made by the law enforcement agencies, can these companies open up this technology? What is the middle path really? You cannot, one side cannot just say, I'm not going to give you anything, and the other side just can't keep asking you all the time.
Yeah, so that is the challenge. So as was mentioned earlier today, it's not like there is no sharing. It's just that the government or the law enforcement in each case has to go to the company and say, please, can you give us this information? And in some cases, as was also mentioned, that has been done. If I can just make a comparison. So here in the UK, we have CCTV, and in a non-democratic country, that would be a terrible thing to be watched wherever you go. So whenever, everybody who has ever been to UK, the UK knows, whenever they are out and about, and even if they are inside shops and so forth, there are cameras watching them. And in an authoritarian country, that would be a terrible, terrible thing, because the government would use this information, for very nefarious purposes, to essentially investigate dissent, where people might gather and so forth. In a democratic country, if the population trusts the government, that's a very useful tool, because it allows the police to solve crimes. And so I feel perfectly safe. In fact, I feel safer knowing that if something were to happen to me, the police would be able to check CCTV and find out who had been in my vicinity. So I think it really boils down to trust in the government, and that's where it really can be only a very, very few countries that could even contemplate or should even contemplate asking for backdoors, which is what this is about, because they really have to have the trust of the population, or otherwise it's going to fail spectacularly.
Absolutely. All right. So, Munish, this issue of terrorism, and terrorists using end-to-end encryption, this is a serious issue. And we've seen that terrorists around the world have wreaked havoc. So, considering that this kind of technology is used by terrorists, what needs to be done? Because we do not want the terrorists to have a free hand.
Well, Frank, I think there are two aspects of when we are speaking about terror outfits using internet per se for different, reasons, for the propagation of for propagation of propaganda, or you can say for recruitment, or terror financing, a whole bunch of activities they do over internet. But I think there are two aspects. One is which is more public, in which they do maintain their own public profiles, like through Facebook or through YouTube or through all these social media platforms. Second is which is more private, which is more communication oriented, in which they communicate one-on-one to people. And if you look at the way this whole recruitment of people over open platforms had been happening, terror outfits, they don't directly communicate one-on-one with people. They fish them around, and once they latch on to somebody who's vulnerable enough, or somebody whom they think is weak enough to be, hired as a recruit or something, then that specific communication between that outfit and the individual moves offline, like what I would say, which moves on to encrypted channel. So there is no denial that this is not a threat. It's an absolute threat. It's visible all across. It's been happening, and I think the solution which we are looking for these particular instances, it's more about working out together in a manner in which, all the stakeholders, whether it's government or the private sector or the individuals who work on the encryption algorithms, all of them to sit together and find a feasible solution. Like backdoors is not a feasible solution. It's technically unviable. It's technically, I would say, it breaks the integrity of the system. And as far as about key escrows, a lot of things are being discussed right now. But I think the question which you asked earlier, I think about privacy and security, right? So I think there is no way you can actually balance both of them without undermining one or the other, because this is a zero-sum game. The time you put over into security, you lose on privacy. The time you put a foot on, privacy, you lose on security, and vice versa, it's correct. So the whole thing is the reason for this particular thing is that you cannot quantify privacy and security. They're always perceptions. They will always remain to be perceptions. So my perception, American perception, British perception, Australian perception, they all will vary. But I think it's more of a diplomatic challenge rather than a technology challenge right now, to engage with all the stakeholders and then figure out something which is collectively good for all of us. Like we can still continue doing whatever we want to without compromising, obviously, on this imminent threat of terrorism to all of us.
Absolutely. All right, time now to get quick closing comments from all my panelists with the best way forward, starting first with the ambassador.
Thank you. So I think we have all tried our best to show that the line between public order and privacy is actually very difficult to define. Having said that, the premise is that these technology operates in democratic systems. My country is a democratic one. My country is threatened by terrorism. These are being misused by terrorists. So somewhere I need to lean on the side of order, because terrorists are not democratic and they are misusing my openness, which includes my technology. So I am ready to say that yes, like in many other cases, we have sacrificed privacy in nature of public order. But I think the safeguards will need to be much stronger, because here, as Munish said, the entire integrity of the system of technology on which we trust will need to be done. So for instance, I think we need to protect our digital imprint, like banks, from individual bank accounts from scrutiny. But certain kind of communications, I believe, can be opened up. But the choice is a difficult one, because this backdoor can very easily become a trapdoor.
Absolutely. All right, Elisabeth.
So this is a question that really demonstrates where we are today. So national security and national security threats are not what they used to be. They're completely different, and they touch on everybody's lives. And in the past, they used to be, though, if you belong to a particular group, or if you live in a particular part of a country or in a particular country, you will encounter national security threats. Today, it touches every one of us, and that's what this is about. And so that's why I think so many users are uncomfortable with this idea of information being shared with law enforcement agencies, because this is supposed to be about their personal lives, and they don't really contemplate the fact that those who wish us ill are using the very same tools that the rest of us use. And I think what needs to happen so that we can avoid a situation where legislators essentially legislate a right for the government to get backdoors, is for the technology companies to develop the same understanding of national security, to develop a sense of responsibility for what they can do to prevent the sort of things that we all want to prevent, for example, terrorist acts in our societies, and indeed in subversion by groups and individuals working on behalf of Russia, let's say, or China, who are, and these are also countries that are very skillful at exploiting our open societies. So if we all just show a little bit of understanding for how national security threats have changed, I think we can get a long way.
Absolutely. All right. And Munish, close the show for us with your quick concluding remark.
In my opinion, I think, had we been contemplating on this question, I think 15, 20 years back, I think it would have still been possible for us to do something technologically. But the way things are now, encryption sits right here on this laptop. It sits right here on my smartphone. It's very much part of our daily lives. So I believe any solution which we are looking forward as a result of this imminent threat from terror activities or acts of criminal activity, I think people, the civil society, they have to be, they are the ones I think whose voice gathers much more of, should gather much more of the attention, because I think they are the ones whose lives it impacts at the end of the day in direct manner. So I believe that whatever solution these countries are looking forward to, I think civil society and public opinion, I think these are two important aspects which should be considered when we devise any of these solutions going forward.
Right. Okay, on that note then, I'll call it a wrap on this edition of The Big Picture. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. What's coming out of this discussion is that democratic processes are being challenged by state and non-state actors, and hence democracies feel that they are susceptible due to their openness of functioning. The idea is to protect oneself and ensure national security is on top of the agenda. Giving backdoor access to encrypted data is not a solution. Striking a balance between privacy and security is going to be a tightrope walk. We have to take consensus from all stakeholders, the public and public opinion at large, and only then come up with a solution, is what the panelists are suggesting. Protect individual digital imprints and trust the law enforcement agencies over non-state actors. With that, it's a wrap. See you again next time.